The dangerous, savage, bestial white man. These are words that themselves are offensive, are misinformed. They're cruel. But they are words that people generally tend to believe. The idea of the white man, the demonization of white people, is so commonplace that it's become such an ingrained part of our society that whites are even buying into it themselves. White guilt is one of those things that's a byproduct of that very idea. But if we peel back the layers and we look deeper, we find darkness everywhere within the hearts of men in general. If you were to peel back the layers to every tribe, nearly every ancestor of every human being, you would find the conquered and the conqueror. You would find the victor and the victim. You would find the winner and the loser. And throughout history, the only people that have a problem with the victor are those who are not sitting on the throne of victory. When we talk about racism, usually it's a one-sided affair. When we talk about the savage nature of man, it's usually a one-sided racial affair too. In the minds of many people of color, the greatest perpetrator of violence, of bloodthirsty conquest, has been the European. The European did one thing that was different than all of the other tribes before them that had conquered. They did it well. That is the one thing that they are guilty of. They did it well. Ask the indigenous people that existed in regions of Africa before the Bantu swept in. Ask them how they feel about the Bantu and their greater war-making capacity. Hell, you can ask people about the Zulu and their greater war-making capacity. You could ask the people that were in Liberia before the Liberian nation was made via assistance from the United States. But we shut up about that. Warring Native Americans. The inclination of man has always been to conquer at certain levels, whether it's conquering the mountain that nobody's climbed, whether it's conquering another nation. There is very little difference between Africans, Europeans, Native Americans, indigenous people, Asians. We all have one thing in common, a history of war and conquest. The construct of race is fairly new, and that was the one innovation, negative innovation, that the European was guilty of. And the very reason that happened was to not share power with other people that were in the United States when the Constitution was written. The three-fifths of a man law was created specifically so that African Americans could not be deemed in the same way as the words of the Constitution, thus eliminating them from the same privilege as whites. But prior to that, race really wasn't a consideration. Race was a construct made for the benefit of those who had written the Constitution. Now, knowing that race has not always been a part of white culture, it has not always been a part of white determination in the treatment of others, does that change things? Blacks had slaves. Native Americans had slaves. African Americans here who got free, they even had slaves. Those that were wealthy enough. And it was odd that they even found wealth in a society where racism was the norm. It was actually systemic. Yet these freed African Americans had slaves. Granted, these slaves were more indentured servants. But the truth of the matter is that their lives and their livelihoods were based off the decisions made by another. Enough with the finger pointing. The bitter pill to swallow is that a tribe of people came along and they conquered better than everybody else. Other than that, there's nothing different about history. People conquer through war. They conquer through social upheavals. They conquer through subliminal ethnic cleansing, changing the population so that it fits the dynamics that they need to gain votes, i.e. the Liberal Party. It's my strong belief, and I'll go out on a limb, this is an opinion, and my opinion may not be popular. I've never wanted to win a popularity contest. But it's my belief that racism probably would go away if African Americans would assimilate the same way that many white conservatives want them to. If they would simply shut up about their anger and shut up about reparations and just fall into the fold of the mainstream culture, racism would die a quiet death. But there's also the principle to consider, which is why this will never happen. There's the sense of justice that many African Americans feel. And I will not knock that. I will not condemn that. I will not belittle that. I understand 120% where a majority of African America is coming from. What I will ask is black expectation. Because if the struggle is more important than the conclusion, then fight the good battle. If the conclusion is more important, cease and desist. I do not condemn either side of that argument. I understand both, and both are relevant. But the stagnation of blacks within our country only exists because of pride, because of a false sense of identity, which is, and I say a false sense of identity because African Americans don't know who they are. What they do is they engage in practices that are nothing but modified versions of European culture. Wearing European-made jeans baggy doesn't make them black. It makes them oversized European jeans. And these words sting. This very, position that I'm taking is going to sting a lot of people. But it is the truth. I don't believe the majority of liberals are bad people. But I don't believe they love, quote unquote, black culture as much as black people do. I don't believe the majority of conservatives are evil. But they would feel a hell of a lot better if you walked like them, talked like them, dressed like them, and understood reality in the same way that they did. We no longer live in a time where you can't find out who you are. Ancestry.com is waiting right now. I'm a hair away from finding out what tribe I actually originated from. Not just what region, but what tribe in Africa. It won't change the fact that the life that I live and the luxuries that I have are very European in nature. I'm beyond race. But I will also have to understand that there are people that are not beyond race. I'm able to appreciate the contributions of everybody in this country. And if white Europeans have contributed in certain areas more than others, I still appreciate those things that have helped to make my life better. If African Americans have contributed in an area that Europeans haven't, I salute them because they've made my American life better. My life is not better because of racial affiliation. My life is better because I recognize the value of all Americans participating. So until we get over race, we have to ask ourselves a question. And that question is what outcome do you want? And if a pseudo-identity as an African American is more important to you than advancing within the culture, which is European in nature, then by all means continue the path that you're on. If you can understand in context what assimilation means, then proceed. There is no wrong path, but there is not an equal path as we would hope. I urge Americans to dig a little deeper. And when you find the truth, if it's ugly, still embrace it because it is the truth. And even though the truth doesn't always bring joy and happiness, it brings clarity. And clarity is the foundation to all things that are real. Be sure to subscribe if you like what we touch upon and the topics that we cover. Be sure to subscribe and support Empirical Planet.